What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. MLS Cup is set. Columbus Crew hosting LAFC. Both teams advancing in the conference finals over the weekend, starting in the East with Columbus's win over Cincinnati. And I want to start on the Cincinnati side of this. And once again, emphasize this playoff run, the way things ultimately unfolded for FC Cincinnati, is why the Supporters Shield has to matter, and it has to be a real trophy that we collectively as a soccer community value. This playoff run, okay, they got past the Red Bulls. Yes, they navigated the shootout to do it. They were the better team. They were going to advance if they had to go to a game 3 at home. They were going to be fine. But then you look at the last two rounds. The controversial goal that still we don't have a good answer whether it was actually a goal or not against the Union. And then this game where they don't play particularly well. The first goal comes off a Columbus mistake. The second goal, that's not a foul. Brandon Vasquez tripped over himself. And unfortunately, VAR can't intervene in that situation. And credit to Luciano Acosta, phenomenal free kick. But that goal shouldn't have been there either. Or the bottom line is they got incredibly fortunate to get to the position they were in. And have now blown 2-0 leads in the U.S. Open Cup final. The U.S. Open Cup semifinal against Inter Miami. And in this game to your arch rival at home. Objectively, for them to end up with neither of those trophies and have won 0 knockout tournaments this season, if that is all you care about, this season has been a failure. And it simply wasn't. They didn't deserve to win this game. Columbus were the better team. And Columbus were the better team in part because Matt Miazga excused himself from most of the postseason, which is his own fault, but a factor in the overall story. And Owen Iwobido was a participant in this game, but clearly not himself and not healthy. The 11 players that started this game that Pat Noonan could rely on from a health and availability standpoint are not winning the Supporters Shield if they're your primary 11. None of this changes the fact that FC Cincinnati was the best team in the league this season. The best team doesn't always win, and that's okay. We just don't need to make it any more complex than that. They weren't great in the postseason, in large part because they weren't at full strength when many other teams were. And I said in my preview for this game, Cincinnati's the favorite if it's not in TQL Stadium. To me, Cincinnati's got the better 11 players starting this game. Cincinnati's best 11 is better, but that's not what we're talking about here. And so in knockout tournaments where you can get eliminated in a single game, weird things happen, like teams coming from 2-0 down and your MLS Defender of the Year getting himself suspended. And it just doesn't need to be a larger conversation. It's not a larger commentary on their season. It was a phenomenal season. And they have the proof in the form of the Supporters Shield. We can value both simultaneously. It doesn't, to me, just have to be either it's a regular season award or we have the playoffs. It can be both. The regular season represents something completely different than the postseason. FC Cincinnati are not the best team in this postseason through a variety of circumstances, and they were the best team in this league. Those two things can coexist. On the Columbus side, this team is just absolutely incredible to watch from a possession standpoint, from the chances they create, from a creativity standpoint. And the game changed when Christian Ramirez and Julian Gressel came onto the field. Because Julian Gressel is probably the best crosser of the ball in MLS, and Christian Ramirez is a target forward. Something that doesn't exist in the starting lineup that Wilfred Nancy used in this game. To me, Gressel's got to start MLS Cup. He is a perfect fit for what they want to do And for somebody who is so adamant about style of play in Wilfred Nancy, to me, you've got to lean all the way in on that. You're not looking for something different in Mo Farsi. You need the guy that's going to go deliver crosses, that's going to possess the ball, that's really good with the ball at his feet. Julian Gressel was excellent when he came in, caused all kinds of issues with the crosses. And Christian Ramirez, again, comes up huge, just like he did the round before. It's great to have those kind of weapons off the bench. I actually probably wouldn't start Christian Ramirez. Not because of anything he's done or anything he hasn't done, but just because you're not taking Cucho off the field, you're not taking Diego Rossi off the field. So you're running out of options here. I mean, you could slide Cucho over to a wing position and start all three of them. But I like the idea of providing a different kind of threat if you need it late in the game, if it's tied, if you're down, just like what happened in this game. You know you have that guy on the bench. This team is sensational. They have a kind of offensive firepower that is maybe unmatched in this league. And if it is, I mean, I guess it's Cincinnati, the team that they just beat fairly convincingly for a game in which they nearly lost by 2. They were the better team, and they just kind of kept coming. It's Cincinnati or LAFC, but to me, there's just another level to this Columbus attack. There's also another level of vulnerability to the defense, and you saw that with that first goal. Mo Farsi gives the ball away. That's part of what they do and who they are. There's going to be a price that comes with it. But they deserving winners. This game probably plays out differently if Cincinnati's at full strength. That's part of the story here. That's part of what happens in the postseason. Weird, unexpected things happen. But the Columbus Crew hosting MLS Cup. And in the West, LAFC go through. Not too much to say about this one. The chances were coming from the opening minutes of the game. They were really, really good in transition. I said before this game, the key to Houston is, can you control the midfield and can you stop those transition moments? Can you prevent Bouanga from getting out into space? Can you stop them from getting the ball down the field really quickly? And the answer was no. That was the way Houston was going to stay in this game. Now, they did keep it close and, were within a goal for most of it, but they didn't really pose that much of a threat. There was one team that was really controlling this game. That was LAFC. Deserving win, absolutely. Keeping another clean sheet. And so here we go. LAFC at Columbus Crew for MLS Cup. Other game I want to mention real quick. Manchester City look like they have blown it against Spurs. Then Jack Grealish scores. Then Kulusevski scores in stoppage time. It's a 3-3 draw. Another throwing game. And more drop points for City. They have now dropped 6 points from winning positions in the 80th minute or later in 3 consecutive games. Cole Palmer's stoppage time penalty, Trent Alexander-Arnold's goal in, I believe it was the 80th minute, and then this one from Kulusevski, also in stoppage time. To put that in perspective, if I did the math correctly, they dropped 11 points from winning positions all of last season. They have dropped 6 in 3 games. On top of that, they have conceded 8 goals in those 3 games. That is the same amount they conceded in the first 11 Premier League games they played this season. This is baffling to me. And it's not exactly stunning that they will drop some points from winning positions because they're so good at scoring the first goal that teams are chasing the game against them most of the time, right? Because they're just a better team. And so if you concede a goal, there's a high probability relative to everybody else that you're doing so from a winning position. But this isn't just conceding goals from winning positions. A lot of those last season were, I believe one was in the first half, a lot of them in the 60s, 75th minute, things like that. These are at the very end of games. This is City being unable to finish off opponents. And this is also not being able to control games, right? Chelsea, back and forth. Chelsea have a lead, lose a lead, ultimately come back to get that late equalizer. Spurs, Open with a goal, then City lead. Spurs equalized through Lo Celso, who is having a really good moment here. Grealish answers, looks like City's going to win it, and they concede again. This kind of stuff just doesn't happen. I don't have an explanation other than this team just doesn't have the same kind of control in games that past iterations of City have. You can point to Jeremy Doku as part of that, but to me, he's not the problem here. There is something bigger going on that is just hard to explain. But every time City drop points, that bar for everybody to reach keeps getting lowered. And some of these points, okay, Liverpool is Liverpool, that's a little different. But this version of Spurs, and even Spurs at full strength, it's full strength, probably not a title contender. The team that Ange Postecoglou put out there in this game, certainly not a title contender. Chelsea, not a title contender. Dropping points, and then in between, you can't beat Liverpool at home. And now this is another game where you drop points at home after literally not doing that in 2023 until the Liverpool game. This idea that, I said this last season, and then they went on the run and ran away with the league. They might do it again. But they are just not producing at the same level that they have in years past. And oh, by the way, now you got a couple guys suspended for yellow card accumulation for your trip to Aston Villa. Also not an easy game. I don't know what else you can ask for in terms of opening this up for a title race. Doesn't mean somebody else is going to win the league. If you have to ask me now, I'm still probably picking Manchester City. But every time this happens, and every time these weird things, like all of these blown leads and late equalizers they're conceding happens, it just makes me more and more determined not to just assume that they're going to figure this out. Because maybe sometime they won't. We're just going to have to wait and see. And the more titles you roll off in a row, the more difficult, in my opinion, it becomes to keep that going and to find that extra gear. That's really all I have to say on this one. Spurs were much better in the second half. City could have had 4 or 5 goals in the first half and really put this game out of reach, and they just didn't. The attack was much, much better. Some of these games, they just don't really look all that threatening, and this was not one of those situations. They capitalized on Spurs' makeshift defense, the high line, the aggressiveness, all of that. And give credit to Spurs. It looked like this was one of those games that Ange Postecoglou, being Ange Postecoglou, probably is a negative. And in the end, it turned out to be a positive because they just kept going, kept fighting, and got the equalizer. Every point they can pick up with all these guys injured in games like this, where you're not expected to get anything, is huge. They just got to keep themselves afloat in this top 4/top 5 race because they are one of the 4 best teams in this league at full strength. I firmly, firmly believe that. They just got to keep themselves in the conversation until you start getting Christian Romero back from his suspension, Van de Ven, Madison, Bentancur, go down the list. They can just hang around. I do think they're poised for a really strong end to the season if these guys can get back and get into a rhythm and stay healthy. It's a big if, but points like this, walking out of the Etihad with something, it's another step in the right direction for Ange Postecoglou and his team. The last thing I'll mention real quickly, I just feel like I owe him some kind of acknowledgement/apology. When Newcastle bought Anthony Gordon, I just didn't get it. Because Anthony Gordon was statistically not a productive player at Everton. Of course, he was super young, so there's every reason to believe he's going to continue to improve and that he would be better ultimately than the player that Newcastle bought. Never in a million years did I think we would be sitting here, still in the year 2023, not even 2027 or something, talking about how Anthony Gordon might be the best player on this Newcastle team. He's been fantastic. And he has been fantastic in a moment, kind of like Giovanni Lo Celso for Spurs, even though on a bigger scale, where this team desperately needed somebody to step up because they are so ravaged with injuries. They're just trying to stay in the Champions League conversation, trying to keep themselves alive in cup competitions, just hang around until they can get that team back. And Anthony Gordon is just coming up absolutely huge. Wanted to give him a moment because I did not see this coming. I was flat out wrong about him. So good for you, Anthony Gordon. Huge, huge goal for Newcastle. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.